We're back and the technical issues have been addressed. The PC has returned to me so I can actually edit and upload videos once again on a Monday. But before we crack on with the video, just 2 seconds, I've got a quick announcement, so don't skip on. As many of you know, online coaching is my primary venture where I help people achieve their goals, be that strength-based, muscle building based, fat loss based, whatever it may be, regardless of whether they train at home or at the gym, or regardless of where they are in the world, because it's online, it's very remote. I help people from all over the place achieve many different things. From May, there will be a waiting list. At the moment, if you hop on a Zoom consultation call with me and you wish to proceed, the turnaround could be pretty quick. From May, I will be implementing a waiting list where there will be a longer turnaround, as I don't take on that many clients at once because I like to communicate with people every day if needed. And if I have too many people I'm working with, that's not possible. And the opportunity to provide daily communication if necessary is quite important to me. And if you fancy it, click the link down below, fill in the very brief application form, will take 2 minutes. Let's hop on a Zoom call, decide whether this is the right thing for you to consider, and we can lock in your start date whenever suits you. But like I said, from May, there will be a bit of a waiting list. But now we move on. Video. Naomi Kong, a name I have covered before, but something I want to address is a beginner leg day. And instead, I'm actually going to look at her recommendations and provide mine. I quite like doing these types of videos as catalysts for conversation because it kind of looks at a bit of a comparison of how two different people might program certain things, and also gives you a bit of an opportunity to decide which one you would prefer, which one might actually align with you and your goals. Straight off the bat, beginner leg day. Number 1, dumbbell squats. It's a movement I've actually discussed many times before. I do not like the dumbbell squat, especially as a beginner. The last thing I want to encourage is you to adopt or utilize movements that I think you cannot overload very effectively, and quite frankly, I don't think you should probably utilize down the line unless it is for a technical purpose. Things like a dumbbell squat, don't see a lot of reasoning behind them because quite frankly, they're not a very effective movement. I think you're better off doing an alternative like potentially learning another squat pattern instead. Leg press, great movement, stable, pretty easy to nail as there aren't too many moving parts, and it can really help with confidence, especially when pushing against resistance without fear of being trapped as other squat patterns might encourage. So I respect that. Seated hamstring curl, banging. If I had to choose one hamstring variation, it would probably be a seated hamstring curl. Cracking, I love that. And hip abductions. Yes and no. Do I think you need them? Probably not. Do I think it could be useful? Yes, arguably, because although we have 2 quad movements here, we do have a hamstring movement and a glute dominant movement as well. So I can see the purpose behind including them. Although if I was choosing 4, I would probably choose a squat pattern, a hamstring curl, a leg extension for the old rec fem as I speak about many times, and maybe something like a glute bridge hip thrust or something along those lines. The reason I don't like the dumbbell squat is primarily it's grip. Grip is going to be a limiting factor here. You will get strong pretty quickly, especially as a beginner. And the last thing you want is not to be able to push a movement to sufficient intensity because of an external limitation such as grip. With that in mind, I would probably favor a squat pattern. The other thing is encouraging good habits. When adopting squat patterns, I'm a big believer in good range of motion. When you're doing a movement like this that deliberately limits your range of motion, I do question whether this actually encourages a bad habit that you will then have to spend time potentially correcting down the line when you do shift over to a squat pattern. A leg press, a couple of things here. Hands on the legs is again another bad habit we want to address. You do not want to do that. The handles are there for a reason. You hold onto the handles and you pull down, because when you start pushing it and maybe go a little bit lower, there's going to be a tendency for your bum or lower back to rise off the pad, which in turn can actually shift a lot of emphasis or pressure over to that area, which can actually be quite painful and not be particularly great when looking at longevity of movement. This is a leg movement. We then don't want to get in the habit of essentially cheating our reps by trying to force resistance through our triceps to help the legs do their job. Another thing here, we do want to encourage good depth. It's again a big habit you see people adopt, which is they half rep their leg presses, which again is something we want to break and get out of, because there's this massive idea that you shouldn't go too low on movements, or if your knees travel over your toes, as I mentioned in the last video, there's going to be a problem. We don't want to enable those myths, and we want to quite frankly bust them before you even got into them. The point here at the bottom of point knees in the same direction as toes is actually quite good. I always do say to people is use your toes like an arrow and your knees should follow said arrow. But there is a point here about avoid locking your knees. I've mentioned this before, so I don't want to kind of go on about it again, but locking your knees out on the leg press isn't actually detrimental unless you're lifting like an absolute sausage and ego lifting, which quite frankly I see plenty around the gym. Doesn't mean you should do it, and is again a habit we want to break before you get started with it. See, the seated hamstring curl I really love. Honestly, it's fantastic. Not only is it a very stable movement, which we like, it's a very easy movement to master because there aren't many moving parts, and it trains the hamstrings really effectively, which is 10 out of 10. I couldn't ask for more. Breathing through movements is actually a really interesting one. I've noticed Naomi through the previous movement as well spoke about breathing, where she was saying exhale as you exert force, inhale as you maybe go through the eccentric. For movements that don't really require a lot of bracing, like this for example, it's not going to be massively relevant. If you're doing like a squat pattern or want to look at effective breathing, I would see it like this. Is imagine you're going underwater. So if you're doing a squat pattern, you breathe in at the top, brace, go down, come all the way up, finish the rep, and then exhale before resetting, breathing, going down, up, exhaling. Again, breathing as if you were literally going underwater. And that's how I try and teach things when it comes to squat patterns, RDLs, or any pattern in which bracing is going to be really important. Like they're not so applicable when doing an isolation-based movement like this, but when doing a larger movement where there's going to be potentially a lot of spinal loading as a consideration, or bracing is going to be quite important, like a squat, an RDL, etc., then it would be far more important and something you should really get in the habit of nailing, although it is much easier said than done. So the hip abduction, again, is actually a fine movement. I've actually changed my stance on this a little bit. I used to be very anti-hip abduction because I didn't think it was needed, but that being said, I have over time changed my stance and decided I actually do favour it as a movement, as it can be quite effective at working things like the glute med, for example, and a glute med kickback might be a bit uncomfortable for you to nail. That being said, you'll see she's very upright here. One thing there, hold on to the handles. They're there for a reason, especially when you're starting out. We do really want to nail utilising the machine how it should probably be utilised. Another thing to consider is when doing this, many people will experience a bit of sciatica, which is essentially pain going down the leg, and that stems from the sciatic nerve. The cause of that could be many things, but sometimes this movement does trigger that for some people, in which case you can potentially alleviate that by leaning forward slightly. So you do not actually have to use the back pad if you don't want to. If you lean forward slightly, you may find it does alleviate whatever is contributing to that sciatica, which in turn might make this movement a little bit more comfortable for you. And although there isn't any one definitive, this is the best leg day for beginners, I do think there is merit behind nailing or focusing on really important movements that will carry you through your training journey earlier on rather than leaving them till later. So yes, many people may say favouring machines is probably the best way to go about it. I don't necessarily think it's the best way, but it's definitely a really good way to go about it, because again, machines are a little bit safer to push and safer to learn due to less moving parts and more stability, and also a little bit easier to learn as well, which can then carry over to slightly bigger movements too. So if you can leg press really deep, you may feel more confident squatting really deep, for example. That being said, let's assume you're still new to the gym, you're still a beginner, but you've got some technical understanding. If I was going to program one leg day for people that I think covered a lot of bases really well, it would, in any order, this order is very much dependent on your priorities. I would probably favor something like a leg curl variation, like a seated leg curl or a lying leg curl, a hip thrust variation, a squat pattern or leg press, depending on your preferences, a hinge pattern like an RDL, a back extension, something along those lines, and a leg extension too. The leg curl will work the hamstrings effectively, the RDL will work the hamstrings and the glutes effectively, the hip thrust will work the glutes effectively, the leg extension will work the quads effectively, and the squat or leg press pattern, depending on how you do it, will work the quads and potentially also the glutes pretty effectively too. So you're covering all bases pretty equally and pretty comfortably. Just doing 2 sets of those, you're probably going to be fine, provided you train hard enough. And although you can just do legs once a week, I would probably recommend, if you program correctly, doing legs twice a week, as frequency does seem to be pretty important when it comes to maximizing results, which again I spoke about in the last video. If you want to train calves, you can train calves as well. That's absolutely fine. I just didn't include it for the sake of ease on this one, but you can certainly add a straight leg calf variation as a 6th movement. But honestly, if you nail those things and learn to do them really effectively, these are all movements or variations of similar movements that you will do probably throughout your fitness journey, regardless of whether you're looking at hypertrophy, strength, or fat loss. These are all going to carry you very far and are very applicable and have good transfer over to other movements too. Just a consideration, and again, this is just simply my opinion when it comes to how I might consider programming for a beginner depending on their goals, and that's a big thing there. This is very much dependent on goals, and your goal may vastly change how I would program. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Drop me a message on Instagram at Harry_TFNL, and as always, the link to the TFNL coaching application is down below in the description, and also maybe even the comment section, as is the link to the TFNL workout guides, which might appeal if coaching doesn't. So let me know your thoughts in the comments section. When you were getting into fitness, which movement was the hardest one for you to nail? I'm curious. For me, personally, it was actually deadlifts, funnily enough, but I'd like to know what yours was. Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my unintentional hiatus due to obviously technical issues, and thank you for tolerating the video.